All right, welcome to Piedmont Free Tells the Truth, where we tackle tough growth challenges so you can make better decisions and avoid wasting money on marketing that just doesn't work. So we have amazing guests. We have an amazing guest today. But first, a little bit about me. You might be wondering, why should I even listen to this guy? Well, one, I've been called the marketing curmudgeon, so there's that. I've been featured in a lot of media outlets. I've owned and operated a marketing firm for 32 years now and counting, and working with clients like Harley Davidson, AMF Worldwide, Rockwell, Northwestern Mutual. I could drop lots of names, and a lot more smaller and growing clients that you probably never heard of. And in Texas, they say it ain't bragging if it's true. So we'll put some links in the comments where you can learn more about me and see past episodes of Tell the Truth. And we do this every Thursday at 11 o'clock Central, so hope you'll join us here on LinkedIn. And today my guest is Dan Klopp, and so he probably has the coolest and hardest marketing job on the planet. And likely other planets actually as well, as Director of Marketing and Business Development for the Space Systems Division of ILC Dover. So let's welcome Dan to the program. It is good to see you.
Good to see you, Pete. I'm glad to join you here.
We appreciate you. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely one of the coolest, I think, products and jobs. And we'll talk a little bit about the company. It does a few other things as well. But I'm just really curious about the level of challenge that you face there. And let me just give people a sense of it. So you have this product, and I'll put it on the screen so people get what I'm talking about here, that is probably one of the most iconic things in the world. And you're not allowed to put your name on it. So that is an interesting situation, but there's a couple other things too that we'll talk about. There's only a couple companies that make spacesuits. And there's a pretty limited number of companies that buy spacesuits. So you're the director of marketing, and you know what does that look like? I mean, in terms of, so we'll start with, so the story is NASA wouldn't let you put the company name on the suit.
That's correct. So just to give some background, we've made every EVA spacesuit for NASA from the Apollo missions through today. So we've been doing this for 55 years. The vast majority of my friends who aren't in the space industry always come, when I say that ILC Dover makes spacesuits, they always say, well, I thought NASA made NASA spacesuits.
Ah, right.
And what they don't understand is that NASA is a government agency that spends our taxpayer dollars on private industry companies that actually do the work. So NASA is not a production facility. They're not even really an engineering facility. NASA engineers write specifications that our engineers take and turn into, then do the product development to turn that into a product. So we have a kind of a unique position. And for decades, NASA has done I think, a masterful job of creating their own PR engine to make the world believe that it's NASA scientists and NASA engineers that are doing all this work, when in fact it's private industry that's doing all the work.
So, first of all, let me say for the record, love NASA, love it. But
I love it too. They're my primary.
We give them a lot of money, and they're not making nothing. Just saying. No, that's so much tremendous innovation coming out of NASA, and I think one of the things that makes this so incredible is, especially people our age, we are the space travel generation. We were huddled around the TV and we watched the first, foot on the moon, and another little fun fact: all of the moon footprints are ILC Dover.
That's correct. We've got the only, in all of humanity, we have the only boot prints on the moon.
In all of humanity. So how many of you out there could say that about your brand? But now, so I know Tom McDonald, one of the guys that was involved in coming up with the strategy for Intel Inside. right? So they had this challenge where they were the invisible brand, and um, there at that time, that idea was revolutionary. It's so simple, right? And it was a sticker, and it
Right.
was easy to execute, and Intel Inside was the big idea. So you weren't really able to do that. Um, and so what does that mean in terms of, what is that, is there a lot of lost opportunity? I mean, why is it
So
in your
ironically,
interest to have your logo on it?
I'm really glad you brought up the Intel Inside, and we didn't rehearse this, so this is you're going to find this very fortuitous, because another layer on top of the issue that we have is that the piece of the spacesuit that ILC Dover makes is really just an ingredient of the entire spacesuit.
Sure.
So although we make everything that you see on the outside, so if you take what we make and put it in front of somebody, they'd go, oh, that's a spacesuit. However, we've been a subcontractor to a company that's now called Collins Aerospace. And back when we started the partnership with them, they were known as Hamilton Standard, but they've changed
Ah,
names
that's
and
a no. I know that
and
name.
they're the prime contractor for spacesuits. So even some industry insiders think, well, Collins makes spacesuits. And it's like, well, sort of. What the piece that Collins makes is the stuff that's inside the life support backpack.
Right. It's the most expensive part too, isn't it?
So it's the most expensive part of the suit, believe it or not. But everything, including the cover that goes over that backpack, is made by ILC Dover. So
I see.
everything you see from the outside is made by us, but we're an ingredient brand to Collins because Collins, it's actually a Collins contract with the government. It's
Wow.
not a contract with ILC Dover directly with the government. So we have this kind of layered, nuanced problem of we can't put our logos on. Collins can't put their logo on. And if logos were allowed, Collins would want to put their logo on because they're the prime contractor. So we're an
Right.
ingredient brand to that. And fortunately, earlier in my career, I spent spent a considerable amount of time with W.L. Gore and Associates, Gore-Tex, waterproof breathable
Gore-Tex.
outerwear,
Right.
and that's an ingredient brand. And it's ironic that you bring up the Intel Inside. So I'm dating myself because it was decades ago that I worked for W.L. Gore and Associates.
Look at our hair, Dan.
And I know. And Intel, before they launched their Intel Inside campaign, actually came to Gore, and I spoke with some Intel marketing people about how we went about
Ah.
building an ingredient brand around the waterproof breathable outerwear brand
Wow.
of Gore-Tex, which was really just so. And the weird thing about that building an ingredient brand that I learned in my experience at Gore is it puts you in competition with your customer, which is a weird place to be. And let me explain a little more about what I mean by that. Is you're competing for brand space in the end consumer's mind. And we were able to build such a strong ingredient brand with Gore-Tex that skiers or joggers, any outdoor activewear kind of person that was buying outdoor activewear would walk into a shop and ask for a Gore-Tex jacket.
Right.
Well, there's no such thing.
Right.
There's a North Face jacket that has Gore-Tex in it.
Right.
But our customer being defined as not the end user, but the person that you ship stuff to and they cut you a check for the stuff you ship to them. Our customers were people like the North Face, LL Bean, these kind of companies that cut and sew. We were the ones that were making these giant rolls of fabric laminate for them. So but then when it comes to the end consumer, that we were able to build such a strong brand that it put us in this sort of headbutting situation with our customers,
right,
which were the companies like the North Face and Marmot and these kind of outerwear companies. That was a strange situation to be in, because you have to temper that a little bit because you don't want to take too much of your cut. I mean, at the same time, you want to build a lot of brand equity. You don't want to take too much of that equity away from your customer.
Well, yes, and so I'm thinking of it in terms of that it all of a sudden it becomes valuable to that manufacturer, let's say North Face, to put that Gore-Tex logo on their product and on their label, and now it's a benefit to them. And I don't know, I mean,
Well,
that's worth
it's a
money
benefit
too.
and a curse because we didn't have just one customer. So now you've got, again, going back to that example of, say, a skier walking into a ski shop and saying, I want a ski jacket, I want a Gore-Tex ski jacket. Well, when they're doing that, it's like it puts the end retailer then in this awkward situation of, well, do you want a Gore-Tex jacket that's made by Marmot, or do you want a Gore-Tex jacket that's made by the North Face?
Right.
So it is that weird sort of
That's
tension kind of thing of it's a benefit but a curse at the
yeah,
same
and
time to the
but
end customer.
the big difference here, there's a couple of huge differences though, and I mean the ideas are the same, but the couple of big differences in the dynamic, which is what I'm really curious about as a marketer, is first of all, if I understand this right, there's only one other company that does this in the world.
Well, so in the last 55 years, there has been only one other company in the world that has made spacesuits that have actually been used in space.
I see.
And that's the Russian company NPP Zavazda. So former Soviet,
Zavazda.
Zavazda. Yes, it's former Soviet, now Russian company that's been doing this for as long as we have, actually a little longer, because we did not do the suits that were used on the Mercury missions or the Gemini missions. We didn't get involved with NASA and spacesuits until the Apollo missions.
Yeah, those are the ugly suits. We call those the
So,
ugly suit years. The other part of the so, you know, lots of companies using Gore-Tex, making different products. I mean, a whole spectrum from
right.
socks, I mean, to everything. So that's a huge difference. The other part of it is massive market for Gore-Tex products, much smaller market, although it's changing for spacesuits. I mean, these two things, you know, as a marketer, I would have to say, if I stepped into your job, I'd be pretty stumped for about 6 months. Um, you know,
I was
and
stumped for the better part of a year, so you're a better man than I.
well, I was bragging, so probably, you know, longer. Um, you know, so these are two interesting things if you think about it. If you think about, you know, if you're watching this podcast, you think about your own company. What would you do if you face these challenges? You're an invisible brand, let's call it that, or you're an ingredient brand, I like that. You have one competitor primarily, um, luckily Russian, kind of a bonus there. If you're going to have a
Well, and they're not
competitor,
really a competitor in the sense that another weird tidbit about spacesuits that most people don't realize is spacesuits are actually in the United States, and we're a US based company, covered under international traffic in arms regulations.
aha,
So we're actually prevented by law from selling to the Russians or the Chinese or anybody else. So we do what, and I'm going to date myself here with this terminology, free world. So we do all the spacesuits for NASA, for the ESA, the European Space Agency astronauts, the Canadian Space Agency astronauts, and JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency astronauts. And
all
those
right.
are the only consortiums in the world, in addition to NASA, that have done spacewalks. So you got the Russians, and the Russians have sold a few suits to the Chinese. So the Chinese have done a few spacewalks, the Russians have done spacewalks, and then NASA, ESA, JAXA, and the Canadian Space Agency have done spacewalks. But all of those, what I term free world astronauts, have done spacewalks in our spacesuits.
So, but it's a very defined universe of suspects, prospects. They're already doing
Yes.
business with them. So, you know, I noticed a new thing that you've brought to the company, doing PR, right? Getting
Yes.
some press. And so my question about that is, why? I mean, what is it that marketing? What's your purpose in this type of restrictive environment?
So space is becoming commercial. And the reason that I was brought on to ILC Dover about 3 years ago is the company owners and CEO at that time recognized that space is becoming commercial. It's no longer just the domain of government organizations. So like NASA or JAXA or the European Space Agency. Those are all government-funded organizations. But now we see an explosion of commercial organizations that are getting involved in space travel. And that was the reason that I was brought on, is we had zero expertise before I got here within the company and I'm not bragging, I'm just saying I have a background in marketing. I've been doing it for 40 plus years now. But there was nobody else in the company that had any sort of understanding of the concepts of marketing. And they didn't need to for the era that they were in, because there was one customer, they knew who we are, we knew who they are. And in that context, what do you need marketing for?
Right. Right. That's a pretty steep.
Now,
That's even a steeper. I mean, I think a lot of marketers have this problem with management, right? But it's even steeper here.
yes.
But you recognize that you're actually, even though if you look at this casually, this market in terms of market life cycle, it's very easy to say, well, this is a mature market. No, it's not actually. It's an emerging market, isn't it?
Yes.
Has it kind of like gone back down the curve?
Very much
Backwards?
an emerging market now with
That's
companies
amazing.
like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Sierra Space getting involved in the human aspect. I mean, we've had private companies launching satellites for quite some time now, a lot of telecom and the whole GPS array, although that was government funded. But there have been satellites being launched by private organizations for some time, but it's a very recent occurrence, especially kind of the time scale of things move in the space world. It's a very recent phenomena that private citizens and private companies are now launching humans into space.
Right. So the emerging space tourism industry. But there's
Yes.
another thing, I think, and that's how you can use brand association because, ILC Dover is actually a pretty diversified company. So some of the things, intermediate bulk packaging, right? Flood barriers, lighter than air aircraft. That's one of my favorite ones, too. So you got two things that get me. And that's aerostats. If you guys can go Google that, look that up, and blimps. Okay, so but the space suit is so iconic. If you could get your logo on there, it fuels the value of and the credibility of the entire brand and all of the other things the company does. To
Yes.
me, that's huge.
Well, and that's, we do try to leverage as best we can the iconic piece of what we do, which isn't that big a market at the end of the day. I mean,
Right.
spacesuits have
Very
been
limited.
in the history of human space travel. There have been fewer than 300 astronauts that have ever taken an EVA, have ever done a spacewalk, left the
Wow.
spacecraft to do a spacewalk.
Well,
And
after
that
the show,
includes-
I'd like to place an order for one. So let's just make sure we don't forget that. But,
bring your checkbook, because
yes.
they're pretty pricey.
I'll have a really big check. But yeah, so you do kind of leverage that. But here's the good news, right, for you. The rule of not having the logo has been changed. You can now, and does this mean that our astronauts are going to look like Ricky Bobby? You know, Red Bull and STP and
We have actually discussed that internally about selling as another revenue stream for the product line, selling space on space, pun intended, selling locations on the suit to other commercial companies for like sponsorship opportunities.
right.
I don't
Red
know that
Bull,
we'll
are
do
you
that,
listening?
but it's been something that in a brainstorming session I brought up the possibility that we could do that now that NASA has changed the rules on allowing, and this change that NASA is making has been sort of gradual over the last several years. The most visible piece of that is NASA funds most of what's going on at SpaceX. A lot of people are confused about
Yes.
that. They think it's Elon's money that's funding that. It's NASA money that's funding that predominantly.
Sure.
I mean, there are some commercial flights, but what NASA has switched to is rather than a purchase model, essentially it's a rental model. So you can think of the SpaceX Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon space vehicle, launch vehicle and spacecraft as the Uber for NASA now. Whereas in the past, NASA would again, NASA engineers actually didn't do the engineering. It was contracted to private companies. So it might have been like Lockheed Martin or a Boeing Aerospace, somebody in of that type of company that actually built the vehicle, but it had NASA logos on the outside. Well, now you see that with the SpaceX vehicles, they have a big SpaceX logo on it.
Right.
And it's because NASA doesn't own that vehicle. SpaceX owns the vehicle, and NASA rents space on it to shuttle their astronauts back and forth to the International Space Station.
Right.
So, and they're moving to that with this most recent contract that we just won a couple of months, or just about a month ago. They're moving to that for spacesuits now too. So we will retain ownership of the spacesuit, and NASA will rent suit services from us. So in that business model, so to speak, because it's our suit, NASA no longer can dictate what's on the outside of the suit.
You know, I think that's great. I mean, and actually, I don't. It wouldn't even bother me if our astronauts were decked out in corporate logos. In fact, as a taxpayer, I'd be like, fantastic. Let's let Red Bull pay for some of this stuff, and they will. You know, I think that's brilliant. I don't think, you know, there's something about the clean white, and then of course, don't forget, you know, NASA has an ego, right? They want their logo on that thing. But I think the other side of this is, and it's surprising to me that the folks that, you know, that maybe had to be convinced, because one of my other first thoughts that I had was, if we can get our logo on that iconic object that's constantly in pictures in the news, it's everywhere all the time, that's going to build into our brand value millions and millions of dollars. And so if there's ever an exit opportunity, and I'm not saying they are, or there's planning or anything like that, but if something like that were to happen, you're talking a difference in valuation of maybe tens of millions of dollars.
Yes.
Just because, and just for that mark, not any of the facilities, products, trademarks, patents,
Right.
nothing, an additional X millions of dollars just for the value of the brand.
Yes.
So it's kind of a no-brainer to market and to do publicity, but it was a hard,
Well,
was
it was a hard
sell
because
for you.
we're a company of engineers. And so, you know, back in the day, it was pure engineering driven. And I've spent my whole career in high-tech companies, engineering companies that had traditionally been engineering driven. So I've got a lot of experience with this sort of changing the mindset of engineers and engineering management kind of mindset into, well, there really is something to this marketing thing. It's not just all about the product. There's actually 4 P's in the marketing equation, and the product is only one of them.
That's right. Well, and I think there's this default position among companies and people, and we find this all the time, that marketing is for one purpose only, that's to bring new customers in. Not necessarily. There's a whole bunch of different ways to leverage the ideas and the process behind marketing for all kinds of different outcomes. You know, the most common one we hear about is we need leads, you know, but that's something that we're always battling against too, because a lot of companies now, for example, having a hard time recruiting, right? Well, guess how you do that? Guess how you fix that? Marketing.
Right.
You know, it's frustrating, I think, sometimes. But you were able to successfully convince the engineers, which, by the way, that's a big deal. You know, God bless them, by the way. We've worked with, so you and I, we've worked in very similar backgrounds, industrial technology, all very engineering driven. You know, right now there are a few industries, and I'll say one of them, IT services. Yeah, don't call me, all right? I don't want to work with you, right? Yeah, there's something about engineers and marketing that's like oil and water. And it's really unfortunate because marketers need engineers, because they fuel the innovation that we market, and engineers need marketing to keep their job.
Well, not only to keep their job, but to make them look like heroes. One of the challenges I faced early in my career, so my first career stop was with Hewlett Packard. And this is back in the day when nobody had heard of Hewlett Packard, unless you were an electrical engineer. I mean, literally
Right.
nobody. This is pre-PC days.
Horseless
So,
carriage days.
um,
Or
and
BC, before computers. That's what I like to say.
before personal computers. And the, um, the challenge that I faced then is that the engineers always wanted to work on, it was more of a directing product development piece of the marketing,
Right.
the full marketing equation, rather than the piece that's the promotional piece of, hey, we need more leads. And so one of the hallmarks early on in my career was convincing engineers that they shouldn't just work on what they thought was cool, because they had no idea whether the customer would think that was cool. Translate into, is the customer willing to pay for that feature?
Right.
Yeah, you think that feature is cool, but if we add that feature, can we recover and then some your R&D investment to add that feature to the product?
Absolutely. And chances are your customer is not a friggin' engineer. It's not you. Like the things
Right.
that you care so deeply about, and this is the heartbreaking thing. Yeah, no one cares about that stuff. And so I think marketing is the entity that can bridge that gap and bring those things together and create a very, very successful product. I mean, like this,
Yeah.
without engineers, this would not exist, and without marketing, this would not exist. And
Right.
so, I think that's all very analog. So,
Well, ironically, I face that same challenge now as space is becoming commercial, particularly with this space tourism aspect. We're accustomed as an organization at ILC Dover of listening to the NASA engineers who are writing the specifications, which don't necessarily, those engineers don't necessarily talk to the astronauts themselves about what would you like to see from a comfort standpoint and so forth. So you'll read, if you do some research, you'll read in the press about how our current spacesuit causes some shoulder injuries. There's some reasons for that from a technical standpoint, but we never put any additional effort into refining that shoulder joint to be more comfortable because it met the specifications that NASA engineers were doing. But we're going into a whole new world now where we need to start paying attention to the end user
yeah,
of, okay, what do they want in a spacesuit? Yeah, they want to stay alive. That's obviously job one. But beyond that, what is it that would appeal to them? And we have, with this new emerging commercial space, we have emerging competitors. So we're no longer going to be the only game in town.
well,
making
and I also
spacesuits.
read, so this fit issue is a big deal, and you guys have some new technology that allows for resizing. So,
Yes.
ILC Dover fits like a glove. I mean, it's just there is innovation to be had, but I think what you're saying is if that innovation, if it's not spec'd, it probably isn't going to happen. But now that's changing, and
Right.
so I think this is amazing. I think it's just is it hard not to just be excited all the time,
Oh, that's I
like
have the
running
coolest
around your
job in the
house, be
world.
like, I can't believe it.
Without a doubt, I have the coolest job in the world. I mean, I get to talk to astronauts all the time. For a kid that grew up during the space race of the 60s, that, as you were saying, you look at our hair and you go, okay, they've been around enough that they were crowded around the one black and white television in your elementary school to watch, like first boots on the moon, and every launch was a big deal when I was back in elementary school.
You didn't miss
And
one. I mean, you just did not miss one.
right,
Even all the way up into the 80s, into the early 90s. I think younger people today, they don't even, went to space. Woo, whoopee,
right,
I pooped, who cares? But for us, I mean, it was a big deal, not every time, but then you would build rockets, right?
right.
And you would build models of the rockets that NASA was launching, and you were on the edge of your seat. It's hard to really describe to people that weren't there.
Yeah, it's and now late in my career to be part of the space industry is definitely a dream come true. I mean,
Wow.
I'm living the dream without a doubt.
Well, and so how do I buy a blimp? Because I'm thinking So I'm going to need a suit and a blimp. And, there's a bigger market for blimps actually than there is for spacesuits.
Well, yes. So something that most people don't realize is the Goodyear blimps that you see flying over sporting events. We built those. Um, so we built the MetLife blimps. The vast majority of our blimp business is actually aerostats, which are, to save your audience having to do the research, they're tethered blimps. So they're blimps without power. Um, and those go to the military for all kinds of spy purposes. It turns out that they're a lot less expensive, so good for the taxpayers, than flying drones over to do surveillance.
Sure. And I would think
we
weather
build
agencies.
special kinds of these with, we put Kevlar exteriors on them, so small arms fire won't bring them down. So the kind of the outside of the ones we sell to the military are kind of have a bulletproof vest on it, if you will, so that
Boy, that's kind of frustrating for the people on the ground trying to take it down. Probably scratching their head, man. I don't understand this.
I keep shooting at it, and you'd
We
think
must
that
be
would
missing.
pop the envelope and make the helium escape and bring the thing down, but it doesn't.
Not gonna
The bullets
happen.
just bounce off.
Oh man.
So anyway, we do all that, but that starts with requirements, and that's a whole other area that I could talk for hours about. Which is we're dealing now with companies, telecom companies. This is in our lighter than air, we call LTA, lighter than air business, so blimps and aerostats, about doing what they're calling pseudo satellites.
Huh.
So rather than launching a telecom satellite into space, which is still really expensive, although the costs are coming down, but it's still really expensive, put them on a blimp that flies really high, these ultra high altitude blimps, way above where commercial and way above where even military aircraft can fly, above any cloud layer, put a solar array on the top of them, because you don't ever have to worry about the clouds. You can store enough energy during daylight hours to recharge the batteries, because you're not ever dealing with cloud cover and all that stuff. You're right up there in the upper layers of the atmosphere, and then they use the motors to keep them geostationary.
Ah, interesting, right?
And then use them as telecommunication as a substitute for satellites, and they're a lot less expensive, it turns out, to do that than do satellites, especially for remote areas that are trying to build out telecommunication infrastructure.
Absolutely, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And what a great time
that's
to be
a discussion
alive.
For another day.
So getting your logo on that suit and being less of an ingredient brand really helps all these other things, because there's so many different things that you can imply. One would be, hey, our level of precision is got to be up to here because we do this thing. I mean, lives depend on this. ILC Dover, you won't explode. There's another tagline you can just take. Just take that. Fits like a glove. You won't explode. Doesn't hurt your shoulder anymore.
Our biggest product line is pharmaceutical containment systems.
Right.
So these are systems used in pharmaceutical manufacturing to contain active pharmaceutical ingredients. And we use that sort of imagery of the spacesuit in that sales situation all the time.
Right. If we can pull this off, look.
Right. We can contain your active pharmaceuticals.
Right. I love that. And, all of you out there that, are hawking your new app, you've been owned. Big deal. You're not making a blimp or a spacesuit. Are you guys still making the inflatable landing pads?
Yeah, we're making, so the Boeing Starliner, which will soon be human qualified to compete with the SpaceX Crew Dragon, we are doing the landing airbags for that. So that, unlike the SpaceX Crew Dragon and all the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions that land in the ocean, the Starliner is designed to land on land.
Right.
And for that final, so it has the drogue chute that comes out after that does the burn through the upper atmosphere, and then the 3 parachutes that come out. But for that final cushioning, since you're not landing on as soft a surface as water, they actually land the Starliner out at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, so they're landing it on some pretty hard sand.
Right.
For that final cushioning, we build a set of airbags that deploy in the last 1,000 feet from the bottom of the Starliner. There's an automated mechanism that pops the heat shield off, and then these airbags deploy, and it provides that final cushioning.
A nice little soft pillow.
Right.
I just love it. I just love all this stuff. I just think it's incredible, and the outside of the box thinking that someone was like, wow, why don't we just create a giant inflatable pillow that shoots out of the bottom? Well, Bob, that sounds like a fantastic idea. I just think it's incredible, and you're just the perfect guy for this role. And so,
for reusable
congratulations.
spacecraft, when you think about it, back in the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo eras, those spacecraft weren't reusable.
No,
they were single use,
disposable.
And so landing them in salt water, the ocean is salt water and very corrosive. So it kind of by default made them single use. Now, SpaceX does some things where they have these giant barges that have a net that stretches between the barges, and they land the spacecraft on the net, but it still has the possibility of dunking into the water. And
sure.
they have built into that contingency. The beauty of what Boeing is doing is there's no threat of saltwater corrosion. They're landing it on land.
Absolutely.
But they needed this other component that we were able to build for them to facilitate that.
Well, and if you've seen an Apollo space capsule, like at the Smithsonian, you can see just how damaged that thing is from that salt water. And, I'd also like to do a little mini play of Elon Musk coming up with the net between the boats. So, what if we had a couple of boats and we put a big giant net in there?
That's
Great
what they
idea,
do.
Mr. Musk. I love it, but he does. He comes up with these things and they work.
I know.
Right? I mean, that's
and it works. I mean,
just don't land too far to the left or too
Right.
far to the right, because that's going to be a big problem. Try to hit the net. Well, I love this, and I think there's so much more that could be covered, and maybe we'll have you on again. I think we should, because what are some things that marketers can kind of take away from these circumstances? Let's think about the marketers that are in a very challenging. They believe, this is so hard trying to sell these transformers, or something. What are some takeaways?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's often dependent on individual circumstances, but again, I'm a big believer in understanding the full, what I call marketing equation, the full 4 Ps. Is what is your customer's perception of your product or services? What is your customer's perception of your pricing strategy? And by the way, perception is reality. So you don't necessarily have to price. You need to create the impression that you're pricing. And price is really a euphemism in the marketing world for total cost of ownership.
Right.
So you could have a high initial price, but if you provide good services that go along with that, if it's a product sort of thing, that mitigates the price, because the customer looks at it from a total cost of ownership, their total cost of ownership perspective. And then you got the awareness piece. Is, do you have a challenge on maybe only half the market even knows you exist? I mean, that's the piece that I'm dealing with now with ILC Dover, is this broader market has never even heard of ILC Dover.
Absolutely.
So we have an awareness problem.
Well, see, and at least you're aware of your awareness problem. I talk to companies all the time that will swear up and down everyone knows us. And especially here in the Central Texas area, where everyone knows you. Really, how many people are moving here every month?
Right.
I guarantee you everybody doesn't know you. And then I'll throw one more thing on that. You mentioned how do they perceive you? How do your customers perceive you? How do you find out?
Yeah,
Ask
I'm
them.
a big proponent of market research.
And nobody wants to do that anymore. People, it's like pulling teeth to get people to do a basic customer survey. We actually will do phone call surveys that are high level, C-level discussions, very short, very polite. But
Right.
I tell people this all the time. Until we have those conversations, until we do that research, it's really almost impossible for us to know the answer.
Well, and one of the secrets of getting market research accepted in organizations is busting the myth of sample size. So if
Yes.
at one point in my career, I ran a market research group for Hewlett Packard, and I got deep into sampling statistics. And there's something that's completely counterintuitive to most people, but is an absolute truism of sampling, is it takes the same number of respondents to get the same statistical accuracy to predict the next mayor of Austin, Texas, that it does to predict the next president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're comparing a population of, what, 1.5 million to a population of 330 million. It's virtually independent of population size. But most people don't understand that. So they think, oh my gosh, I need to talk to X percentage
Right.
of my population. And it's not true at all. You need to talk to a fixed number of people. And it's shocking how small that number can be, as long as you randomly select those people,
Right.
how small that number can be to get statistically valid understanding of what your broader customers base thinks about you.
I love that you brought that up, because we go to market. Our differentiator here at Clarity Marketing Support is experience. Okay, if you can find a marketing agency in business longer than us, hire them. Okay, experience. Well, what does it mean in a practical sense? One thing it means, we can work with small sample sizes and quickly see patterns. Why? Because we've done it 1,000 times, right? And we've done it 1,000 times in your industry. All right, so that doesn't mean that we're going to assume we know the answer, because every single company has unique circumstances. And what I love about customer research the most is it's those things that you find out that they weren't even on your radar. You didn't even think of them. You discover these things like, holy cow, how did we miss that? Your customers will tell you. They'll tell you everything. Now, I'll throw this out there. You want to make those surveys anonymous so that they feel comfortable telling you everything. Because if you think, well, yeah, I'll just get on the phone and call a few of my customers. Listen, they don't want to hurt your feelings. They're not gonna tell you the things that you actually need to know. They're gonna tell me though, right? And and this is part of our value
Exactly.
that we bring. People that have been doing this a while. So and again, I'm such a mean guy, and I'm gonna be mean for a minute. If your marketing guy's 25. Not going to say anything else about it. It's all about how much risk can you stand. Like a friend of mine's a stuntman, right? His idea of risk is way different from mine, right? And so it's like, how much risk do you want to take? You want to take less risk? Do better, more research. Okay? You don't care about risk? Don't do any research. Just throw some stuff up, see what works. And how often do companies do that? Hey, let's just try some stuff. That does seem to be the default mode these days. We're just going to try some stuff, right? And Gartner says only 11% of marketers are happy with the results they're getting from their marketing. Only 11%. To me, that is a huge warning for the industry.
Yes.
Right? And I do think that it has to do with the youthification of the industry. And it makes me sound like an old man screaming at the sky, but it's true. I mean, it's like, I know that I would say in my first 10 years of being in this business were quite a learning curve, significant learning curve. And I learn things every day. I'm still learning. And I still don't know all the answers or even most of the answers. I just know that there's a process that you can use to make better, lower risk decisions. And research is part of it. This podcast is part of it. Dan, now you're part of it. But
I'd like to just real quickly reinforce something that you just said about the anonymous aspect of market research. That was something that I was fortunate enough when I was running that market research group in Hewlett Packard to have a big enough budget to do research on market research.
I love that.
So I was able to run the same study different ways using different market research methodologies. And one of the things that becomes immediately obvious is if the respondent knows who's asking the question and it's a recognized name in the industry, they will give different answers than if they don't know who's asking the question. It is such a truism. And I was able to actually run the same study, one identifying that, well, it's Hewlett Packard and we're a player in this market, and tell us what you think of our products and our competitors' products. versus running it completely anonymously through an agency that was, well, just tell us what you think about these different companies in this market.
Right.
And you get such a different answer.
I think you're going to get a better answer if
Yes.
it's
You get an answer that's
anonymous.
far more reflective of their actual buying behavior.
No doubt.
With the anonymous route.
I think that we could do an entire thing, and maybe we should, on research, because I think that I have an interest definitely in promoting the idea of research, because listen, do your research, your marketing's going to be more successful, we as an agency going to be more successful, client going to be more successful. It does come down to research and your process. So anyway, I hear the music coming on, also because I'm turning it on, and but I really appreciate you, man. It's good to see you. We don't talk enough. We need to talk more, and I would love to have you again and dig a little bit deeper into some of these ideas and just general marketing strategy, that applies to all companies. And I think that people could learn a lot from you, and I know I have and will and continue to do so. So thanks, man, and thanks for helping us conquer space.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Does it get any better than that?
No, it doesn't get any better than that. We're looking forward to putting the next set of boot prints on the moon in a few years here.
I hope they're mine.
I've got, for the next podcast that we do, I've got a really interesting story that relates to Nike and asking them to be a boot partner with us and them turning us down.
Oh, and them turning you down. Well, let's save that for next time. So join us every week, 11 o'clock Central on LinkedIn for Piedmont Retells the Truth. Signing off, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't you hang on after here and just hang on a minute. Wow, what a great interview, and what a blast. Join us next week. Same day, same time, same bat channel. We'll be right here talking about marketing.
Come on, baby, tell the truth.